We should have sound, and I'm going to go ahead and start it. All right. A little light on the subject. So this is just going to be kind of a, play around stream, nothing major. Just a 30 or 45 minute long stream. We're going to be working on these as much as possible. I'm going to have to move this over. That's what I'm going to have to do. Get a bit better prepared for this. Alright. So we're going to work on these guys. These are from my sister. Picked them up from a friend who 3D printed them. Now I don't have to worry about buying them. I can 3D print them myself. And why are you not focused? Alright. But I can 3D print them myself. In my off time, I have kind of just played around and added some different shading and highlights to it. I'm not really crazy about it. You can see a lot of brush strokes, so I need to add more white. For that, we're using P3's Menoth White Highlight. Just kind of play around. None of this video is sponsored in any way. It's just kind of playing around, seeing what I like. Got a little bit of H2O to the mix. So we can thin the paint out, but not too much. And we're just going to kind of brush this stuff on here, little happy brush strokes. I probably should honestly use a larger brush, because the age-old trick is you always want to use a larger brush than what you think you need. Otherwise you get brush strokes. The more time that you have to touch the model with a brush, the more chance of leaving brush strokes. And that's not what we want. The goal is smooth and creamy every day. I don't think I put enough coats on the base coat, so I think that's what a lot of my problem is, and that is not thin enough. Maybe that'll thin it out to where I need it. There we go. We just want some nice thin coats that don't look like garbage. Because the goal when hand painting is to make your stuff look amazing. And yeah, let's bring this in a little closer. Maybe that'll do a little bit better. Alright, yeah, it's a little bit better. I'm still kind of working out camera angles and stuff like that, being my second legitimate live stream. We're going to see how that goes. For those of you that were able to tune in last week, or the last time I streamed, kind of talked about what I've been up to. Work like crazy, and it's been fun. So I've been meaning to get to the bench, but it just seems like every time I got the chance to, I was wore out. So I've been trying to make more of a conscious effort to get to the bench, just so that I'd have more time with you all and wouldn't have to worry about it. And making that conscious effort has really helped, because now I feel like I don't know, kind of getting the mojo back. I kind of lost it for a bit, I'm not going to lie. And it was kind of a bummer, because I really liked hanging out with y'all and painting and, having that excuse to paint. So, don't do what I just did and mess up. This is the problem with repainting what you've already painted, because you're not crazy about it. You're going to mess up your areas, and that's okay. We'll let that dry. We'll hit this one, because this one had even less coats, and you can see the horrible streaking. Just wasn't crazy about that. I really thought it would dry a little bit better, but it did not. This is also not wanting to thin out like it should. I don't understand that. So I may have to do multiple coats on this, just to, I don't know, get that solid look. And white is an extremely hard color to make look good. It's doable, but it is definitely a lot more difficult to do, just because it's such an opaque, or not opaque, but a transparent color, that it really shows up the undercoats. So what I based this in while we're doing this was Minoth white base. And if you don't know what P3 paints are, they make a series of paints like that that have their own base highlight and then your pinpoint highlight, I guess you'd call it. So this one, I think it just comes with two colors. You got Minoth white base and Minoth white highlight, and those two together create a solid base coat and highlight coat for a white. Because white, like I said, is a very hard color to get to look good. If you can pull it off, then it'll really help your overall painting experience. Because there are going to be colors you're going to run into that are not going to be, we'll call them the most behavioral or well-behaved paints. And white is definitely one of them. But if you go in thin coats and take your time and don't rush like I did, it usually ends up pretty good. And you can kind of enjoy the process. Let that one dry. We're still a little wet here. That's okay. I also probably need to rehydrate my mat. But that's also okay. I like to live dangerous here at the compound, because if you don't live dangerous, what's the fun? I may honestly repaint all of his white. I'm not crazy about how this white's turning out. I don't know if it's because it's old or what, but it's definitely not turning out the way I want it to do. That is not a clean brush. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm always terrified after I got that one Yeti that just didn't work, that I'm going to run into the same situation with another one. So if at any point in time my mic cuts out, throw it in the chat, because it's supposed to have a playback. I should be able to hear myself, but I don't hear myself. So that always has me worried. While we're waiting on the stuff to dry, I did kind of highlight the top of his head. I have not blended it back in. I might actually go with a little brighter. I mixed AK's burnt orange with, not carmine, blood red to kind of create a more orange. But I think in all hindsight, I probably just went with the burnt orange because I think it would have been fine to get that in view. But I didn't, so we might do that while we're waiting. Actually, I think I'm just going to start over with this. So what you're technically supposed to do at the end of every painting session, unless you're going to come back in like a day or an hour or something, is to take your stuff and put it in the trash. And it just so happens that I have more water. We'll do that. We'll move this stuff out of the way. This is why wet palettes are key. So this is dry. I mean, it's kind of moist, not really bad. I don't know why we have because I was moving too quick. Just take your water. That's all this is. Spray. You don't want it super wet, but you want it wet, wet. Then you're going to take my pre-cut sheet. It does not have to be the same size. As long as it will fit in there flat, you're good. You have two ways. Well, since I've touched that down, I have to put that there. Lay your stuff in there. And some people will flip those over. I know I've gone over this in a video. They'll flip them over and get both sides. But as long as you hold down the edges and they adhere to your paper towel in this case, yeah, you're good. Smooth out any ridges that form up. And then we're going to take our paint. Shake the hell out of it, because that's what you always do with paint. If you don't shake it, are you really even playing with it? Or painting with it. I guess that would be the right word to say. But yeah, we're going to take our burnt orange. Like I said before, I mixed a blood orange, or blood red and burnt orange together. And they're pretty similar in color. On camera it looks, a lot different, but they are pretty similar in color. So I think just the burnt orange will be okay. And I'm pretty sure that I've got a brighter orange red by Vallejo that I can put in here. And you just put a couple dabs in there. It doesn't have to be a whole lot, because you don't want to waste your stuff. Paint's expensive, right? Let's see. We might throw some yellow in here. We've got lemon yellow in this case to kind of brighten up the orange. So we'll just shake the living shit out of it. Oh, sorry. I may need to shake that a little bit more. And a little dab of that on there. It's like happy trees. And I just realized too, nobody told me that this was in the way. So let's move it. Look at that magic. Alright, you're going to take your water, even though you put water underneath it. You want to put water on top, because you got to have a mixing agent. You could also, at this point, put like flow improver or something to keep it from drying as quickly. But you don't really have to with a wet palette, because the moisture underneath wicks through the the baking paper. Don't use wax paper, you'll have a really bad time. But it seeps through ever so slightly to keep this paint moist. So you want a little bit of water on top so you can speed up that process if you need to. But all you do is you take a little bit out here, dab it in your water, and mix it in. Then what you can do is you can drag it. And you'll kind of see the properties that you're going to get when you mix those. Again, Flow Improver will do this. I typically use Flow Improver with dry painting, not wet palette, or my airbrush. But when I'm using a wet palette, just good old water works for me. It's not letting me down yet anyway. So we're going to take this, and if you were going to the point where you were going to feather your edges or blur your lines, then you'd want to, take your thumb and see what it looks like. But what we're going to do, move this out of the way so I can get in here. We're just going to paint this on here. And again, thin coats are good. You don't want to go overboard, because if you go overboard, it's going to be bad. And why is this out of focus again? Oh, look at those lines. That's terrible. Alright. But since I've already painted this once, we can go up and follow those lines. I don't know if you can see them on here, but there are little lines that are similar colored to the original color, or not the original color, but the highlight color that I made on here. And what this is going to do, just like with any highlight, it's going to highlight the attributes. In all honesty, I probably could have just taken this color and made a smaller highlight, because there wasn't much difference between the two, and it would have probably worked. But I like to do things a little different. And by different, I mean wing it. And we'll fade those edges in there in a little bit. So we'll go on his face tentacles. We'll go on the top of these eyelids. And that's just going to give you a nice brighter color. It helps if I have it in focus, but a nice brighter color so that you can kind of see these pop out. We're going to do the same thing for the top of the claws. Go in here, get a little bit more. Now, the big thing to remember when doing this, colors are brighter when they're wet. And this is something I struggle with all the time, because I'm afraid that I'm going too light and it's going to look terrible, and it's just not going to go with the overall flow. But once you let those dry and you really see how they are, you can judge them better. Hit the tops of the feet. And with those, I just kind of went back and forth, kind of give the feet a little texture. Because with this, you're just giving it depth. You're giving it a third dimension. Even though this is a three-dimensional figure, there's a lot of smooth surfaces on here that once they're painted, you may not notice that they are, I don't know, really three-dimensional. They're going to look flat until you make them not look flat. Some of the best painters I've ever seen can take a smooth object and make it look like it is a stone or brick or some sort of extra texture. And they don't do it by witchcraft. They do it simply by highlight, shading, shadow placement, all of those things tie together to create what you want. And I've said it before, I'll say it 100 times. There's nothing in this industry that is difficult. It just takes time. So now that that's had time to dry, we'll go back through, put a second layer. We're not going to go crazy on this because we will be bringing this all together with some feathering, and it's been so long I don't remember the name of the technique. And then just repeat the process all over again. Just to give it that extra depth, to make sure you're covering all the areas. Sometimes you might go through and see an area that you should have hit but you didn't, you forgot to, whatever it is. There are multiple ways you can achieve these looks. A lot of the time it's just trial and error, seeing which way you want to go and how you want the light to look. It's all in your hands. You can also vary the thickness of the paint. You can make the paint a lot thinner and do a lighter effect. So like right here, the paint looks really wet and malleable, but when it dries, because it's such a thin layer, it's going to disappear. Not fully, but it will be very, very transparent. And you can use that to your advantage. You can make paint as opaque or transparent as you want to play with the light source, play with its opacity. Think of it as you taking a picture. You have complete control over how that picture turns out in the editing process. So we are essentially editing a canvas that we were able to make. And although it looks bright and vibrant now, it's not. It's a lot more tame than what it looks like. I'm happy with all the other colors. It's just the white. I may go back through and redo it with a different color. I don't know. I'm not crazy about that. I think I made my shadow areas a little too big. Right there it's fine. But I think right here on the front, to kind of emphasize the fact that he has, a little bit of a gut, and you can see it to the side, a little bit of one. So I wanted some shadow underneath. I think that I went a little overboard with that. So just kind of have to go from there. So now we're going to take the yellow, just a little bit, mix it in. A little brighter hue. And if that's too bright, we can mix a little bit of the orange back in, make it a little darker. Now, the goal of this is to create a thin layer to go on top. So we'll start on the feet. So there, I got too much paint. Oh, my word. I have too much paint on there. So you can check so by your thumbnail. If you have too much paint, you can rub it off on your wet palette and try again. And again, don't get discouraged. All of this is going to fade out once it dries. Sorry, I was on a good train of thought. And with your brightest color, all you want to do is hit the high spots. The highest point in light. So with this, you're just going to let it settle. I know it seems really bright now. And I'm probably going to go one step further and make it a little bit brighter. But like on this area, we might increase this just a hair. And what this is going to do is imitate a very bright light source. Or shiny light source. We'll drag this up. Went a little too heavy on that, but that's okay. And you just let it dry. That's the most important part, is to let it dry. If you don't let it dry, then you're, for some reason, everything's going crazy. There we go. If you don't let it dry, you're just going to move your paint around, and then you're just going to have a bad time. A lot of this ends in someone having a bad time if they don't do it right. And the number one thing that I see people do is they move too quick. They'll try and paint, and then wait a second, and then they'll try and paint again. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And because you're painting so thin too, it goes really quickly as far as drying times go. If you live in a humid area, you may want to get a hairdryer and begin like hair drying your finished stuff in between each coat. And what that's going to do is really speed up the drying time. So much so that you will not believe how fast painting a miniature can go, because you don't have to wait. Now, if you've got like a line of miniatures that you need to paint, then by all means, set them down, unless you're wanting to paint them yourself, like as an assembly line, which is also a good way to do. Actually decided I want to bring this out a little bit more. So it gives the almost illusion that he's shiny. That's what you want, is that shiny illusion. So now we need to take the colors that we created and we're going to create a wash. And it's simple. It's simple to do this. You're going to take your color. You'll make a really thin, really thin color of it. So then we're going to go from dark to light. Actually, no, we're not. I did that wrong. So you want to go from light to dark. And we're going to take our blood red, mix it up right here. Take our blood red, drop it on the palette. I put too much, that's okay. We're going to take a little bit of water and we're going to make a really thin slurry. It may not even be enough. There we go. And then we're going to take from our lightest point, which we may want to take and wipe some of that off. We're going to start bringing it down what this is going to do is going to blur the hard edge that we created with our lines. Now this process is going to take a while because you need to build it up in small, thin layers. If you go too quick, it'll look rushed, and you don't want that. We're going to go through and repeat this multiple times until we get the desired effect. Let that dry. We'll talk for a minute. Well, I would talk, but no one else has shown up. Again, why are you're falling? Stay. Okay, we're staying for now. How come nobody told me I was falling? And you always want to pull the paint away from where you're working, because the most paint is deposited at the end of the brush stroke. And what this is going to do is put a very thin layer over your hard line, and it's going to smooth that transition to where it will, again, it'll look seamless. And if you do it in enough layers and thin enough, you can pretty much make it disappear. And because they're such thin layers, you won't even notice the brush strokes, or there won't be any brush strokes. So now all you see after we've done one or two coats of that is the stark contrast between this brighter orange yellow and the red. And we're going to make that disappear as well. Same principle. You're going to take your already thinned down mixture right here, add a little bit of water to it, a little bit more. You want it to be thin. Now if you get a lot of extra, just take a paper towel and dab that off of there. And we're going to go same way. Actually, no. I was ahead of myself. We need to take our orange mixture and thin that out, because we need to go from light to dark, not dark to light. Oops. Some cases you can, but not this one. And this is going to really make that transition pop. Now, like these small ridged areas, like the eyebrows and that stuff, I wouldn't worry so much about those. And that's going to give you a nice contrasty color, but make it look more defined and detailed. The key is to keep it nice and thin. So you can deposit your brush strokes where you want them and where you want them only. So you're not putting paint where you don't want it to be. You can dab it on there to get a bit of definition and detail, but it makes the figure stand out even more. Gives it that three-dimensional look. And then if you need to go back with your darker color and blend the previous layers out, you already have that on your wet palette. So any spots that still don't look good, you just got to figure out which color needs to be blended and kind of blend it. You can take and add some color in here, smooth these jagged lines out, and that's going to give you a much smoother transition as well. And that'll give you the overall look that you're going for. So this is a bad combination because this one's purple, but you can see the detail that you can pick out versus a solid base coat and a highlighted one. You really pick out more of the details and it just looks more, it looks better, looks mo better. But I think that's where I'm going to end it, guys. I just kind of wanted to get on here and paint a little bit and, you know, hang out with you all. And thank you all that have decided to stop on the stream. It's much appreciated and very welcomed. But that is all I've got, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you.